So I guess we'll just start quick with some introductions. My name's Garrett Breeze. I am primarily a show choir arranger, and these people here next to me in the little boxes are the ones who record my tracks for me. So that's primarily how we have worked together, although as you'll see tonight, they all have experience in a lot of different areas. They kind of cover all the bases. So I know we have diehard show choir people on the Zoom chat. I know we have, church musicians and other kinds of people participating tonight. So I think probably the easiest way to handle everything would be just if you guys have a question, throw it in the chat, and then I'll make sure that we cover whatever that topic is. And then at the end, we'll probably have time for a little bit of a Q&A. But just to kick things off, we have Mike Raunick, who is a choir director from Indianapolis, and he started a company called Riverbend that has done, 150 virtual choir videos so far?
Yep.
So he's very into that world right now. Kate Burns teaches choir in Massachusetts, and she is big in the a cappella scene over there. Megan Santi used to teach at Belmont as one of the ensemble instructors, and she also has her own a cappella group and arranges for everybody and accompanies for everybody and records for everybody and does worship at church and just does everything. And then we have Cazz Brindis, who is a legit real life songwriter, producer from LA. So we've got a lot of different backgrounds here, but just to, I guess, start off with kind of the way that we have been working together. Basically, a couple years ago, I found out that it was really beneficial for show choirs to have recordings of my arrangements with voices on them. So I would generate like a MIDI instrumental track of something that I was making, and then I'd send it off to one or more of these lovely people to record the vocal parts on it. And initially that was mostly for the choreographer's sake, because I would often be doing something that was different from the original, or we'd be making cuts, and so it wouldn't always be clear from the MIDI what the lyrics were. And as you know, sometimes that affects how choreographers make choices about things. So it sort of started out primarily for the choreographers, and a lot of the directors were like, I don't really need these, but my choreographer says they want them, so we'll go ahead and do it. And what we found was that it really sped up the learning process for the kids, because instead of sitting there and plunking notes for the whole rehearsal, they could just take it home, have it a week before, learn their parts, and come in prepared to do the fun stuff in rehearsal. So it really sped up the upfront part of learning the songs, and I guess the boring part, and it made for more effective use of rehearsal time. I mean, I don't think you're ever going to totally get away from the note plunking, but I think it sped up that initial phase. And I think there's also an argument to be made too for just demonstrating vocal styles. In show choir, we do a lot of different styles of music, pop music, Broadway, that sort of thing. And so it gave the kids just another perspective on that besides their own teacher singing things at them. And of course, then all of this exploded this year with the pandemic, because everybody was needing to figure out a way to teach remotely and to teach parts remotely and to have choir over the computer. And so we were in a good position when this all started to sort of keep doing what we've been doing, because we've been working remotely for years. I mean, I'm in Nashville, Megan's in Nashville, but Mike's in Indianapolis, Kate's in Massachusetts, Cazz is in LA. I mean, so we're all over the place, and we're constantly sort of sending files back and forth and mixing things and editing things and collaborating. So why don't we jump in first by, I guess let's start with you, Mike. Could you just go through real quick your home setup? What software are you using to record? What microphones, that kind of thing? Where in your house are you? Just a quick rundown. And why don't we just start with you and then have everybody else kind of take 1 or 2 minutes and walk us through what you're using.
Yeah, well, I think I'm probably the most simple and novice of everybody on as far as recording goes. So I just use this mic right here, which I don't even know what it is. I bought it a while ago. I don't know what brand. I think Garrett, you bought it for me actually.
That was an Amazon deal, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's nothing. So it is of nothing. It's nothing special. So sorry, Cazz, that's probably offensive to you. So I'm running that just through an interface into my computer. I just have a Behringer audio interface to connect, and then I use Logic to record, and I mean, that's really it. I don't have anything super fancy. I do have studio monitors that I use to listen, but that's not really important for the recording process. That's just something that I have. So yeah, I think that's about it.
All right, who's next? Megan, you want to go?
Sure. Yes, I will always say first that I'm not an audio engineer, and I like the setup here with Garrett because he does all the mixing, which is I hate. So my setup is a Sontronics Helios tube mic, and condenser version. I guess I can put that in the screen here. Ooh, anyway, and then your pop filter. I have a baffle on it because I am currently in my laundry room / my husband's home office / our utility room / it's kind of a, anything that needs to happen in here. So that helps kind of absorb some stuff. And then these doors behind me have a sound barrier curtain on the other side, because the other side of this door is my toddler's playroom. So it's it's always an adventure here in the house. And I use Logic, and I use just a little Scarlett audio interface to connect. And when I first started doing this, I was using the built-in microphone of my computer and GarageBand. Oh, so this is a really nice improvement over that original situation. I think that's all you wanted us to cover, right, Garrett?
Yeah. So I think the takeaway so far is any sort of microphone is better than not having one, right?
Yes. Oh, for sure. Yes.
Right. Kate, what about you?
So I am working with a pretty nice but simple Audio-Technica mic that I sometimes actually, believe it or not, will hold, and sometimes I'll place somewhere. I have 2 spots in the house where I record. One is a walk-in closet, and one is like the dog's room in the basement that happens to have foam like blocks on the ground. So they both work because they're kind of isolated and padded, but it is like very strange. So sometimes, depending on what room I'm in, I'll actually hold the mic, and that actually I wire directly into my laptop, and I actually record my vocals into GarageBand.
Nice.
In the past, yeah, I've used Pro Tools in the past, but that was because the school I taught at got Pro Tools for me, and now I teach in a public school and I don't have anything. So I go right into GarageBand, and then I actually send all my raw files over to Cazz, who mixes them for me with his voice. And a great pair of headphones goes a long way, I will also say. I've used all the headphones in the world, but it has to be wired, and they hopefully will give you the best version of your sound, so that you can do your best singing.
All right, Cazz?
And then I am currently on a Shure SM7B, which is a great cheap mic. Great for like podcasts and broadcasting, but it's also good for singing in less than ideal spaces because it's not going to pick up any background noise. Tori's on here. My wife sometimes is like teaching choreo in another room, and this mic won't pick it up, which is great. But I also use a nice tube condenser mic by Charter Oak, and I have a bunch of other mics around my space for different things, because I do a lot of instrument recording too, like pianos and guitars and amps and keyboards, so I kind of just like grab as I need it. I'm using a couple Neve preamps that are going into an Apollo interface. And I also have a couple compressors that I like to use. And I'm in Pro Tools. I think Garrett's in Pro Tools as well. That's just because I grew up on it. And yeah. Did I miss anything, Garrett?
I don't think so.
Cool.
So Megan, why don't you just real quick for those of you for somebody who's never recorded themselves ever before, like what's the basic setup? How do you get it so that you can hear your track and yourself, and how do you position the mic, and just what's the basic where to plug stuff in?
So when you're first getting started, you allow some time for trial and error and don't do it on a deadline. And I would say that it depends on the software you're using for sure. But for in Logic, you're just going to make sure that you understand how to create an audio track and run your inputs for the right thing. If you just open up Logic on your computer, it's going to default to your built-in microphone. And if you're using a microphone and an audio interface, you'll need to set that up and tell Logic where to find it. And then as far as placement, it depends on how you sing. So I know that I am a little bit, I'm not for this kind of recording that I'm doing, it's not going to be the intimate, Billie Eilish sort of thing that you're going to be if you're doing like some pop BGVs for a record on the radio, right? So I tend to place the microphone a little bit lower so it gets a little bit more of that mouth space instead of some of the nasality that you want to have in some of the indie stuff. So it depends on your genre a little bit, but I swear by a pop filter because wow, consonants, especially with this kind of genre of recording, you want to make sure that you're clear, but not in a way that's going to, blast through the mix of your wonderful T sounds. And then think about the room that you're in. You can see that the room I'm in is very hard. We don't have, wonderful soft foam on the walls to absorb everything. So if you can get into a corner and have clothes hanging up, like the walk-in closet that Kate mentioned, like that's gonna really absorb any reverberation or tinniness that's gonna make your sound not sound like you. And then play it back several times to just kind of feel like, okay, what am I capturing in my microphone? And then what is something that I can adjust a little bit with the EQ? And y'all mixing people can spend a little bit more time talking about that. But there's some that you just want to capture a really good signal to start with. And then there's some on the back end of mixing it in with everybody else that you can kind of adjust some of the frequencies that are actually getting played back.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a general rule of thumb, the drier you get the sound, or the more, I guess, the more clean you can get the sound, the more stuff you can do with it afterwards to make it better.
And I'll add to that, I, as a live performer, when you're working with in-ear monitors, a lot of singers first starting out are really going to want that reverb in their in-ears because it sounds fun. Everybody likes to sing in a bathroom. But as a director, I would always have the sound engineer make a dry mix in everyone's in-ears because it didn't hide anything when you're coming with tuning and blending and that kind of thing. So it's not as enjoyable to listen to in your in-ear mix, but that's kind of the point. You want to have a really accurate sound. So that's true when you're recording as well, is that, yeah, we're going to put some reverb, we're going to put some cool effects on it on the back end. But when you're recording, you want a really dry sound so you really know what you're capturing.
So what does everybody do? Do you have like, I mean, do you have a favorite ear? Do you have like one headphone in with the track and then another one with your voice, or how do you set that up? Because you don't want to have it playing back in your speakers because that'll get recorded. So you have to mask the audio.
I always have my right ear off. It's just a habit. I'm sure you all do different things. Some singers keep them both on, but always have my right ear off. Even if I'm like sitting here talking to you, there's a good chance you'll see it off.
Yeah, I always have I think my right also, I have to like think about it, but I always have my right ear off, but it really is important to me to hear myself live. I've gone through periods like where I've tried doing it with both ears on and then just listening through like the monitor through Logic. And I really kind of what Megan was saying is that even if I have it pretty clean, I still feel like I'm not really hearing what's happening when I'm listening through the headphones only. So I want to hear myself in the room and then also obviously hear, you know, what I'm singing along to, but that's important to me.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I think I keep my left headphone off when I'm singing, and then when I listen back, I cover both and make sure that everything's sounding like I expect it to.
So Kate, why don't you talk a little bit about just sight reading things when you're recording and what that is like, and maybe share some tricks for that.
Sure. So I started out as a pianist, and for whatever reason, I find that I gravitate towards sight reading rhythms first, even before pitches. And so, especially for a tricky piece or an arrangement where there's a lot of tempo changes, I will go through it almost exclusively speaking on rhythm, sometimes listening to the track or sometimes just counting it out like old school. I'll put a click on and just talk through it. And then I'll add pitch after that. At that point, if there's a particular section where I'm struggling, or if there's a lot of divisi, right? So if I'm recording all the soprano alto parts, and a lot of especially show choir arrangements these days are heavy divisi for the treble voices and maybe less divisi for the tenor bari bass. So if I'm like doing a 6 or 7 part chord, I might isolate a couple measures and check all my jumps. So also it's super important to make sure that you're tracking each line through correctly. So if I'm a soprano 2, and sometimes there's 2 soprano 2 notes or something because you've got your stinger way up high. So I'm making sure that I'm reading it logically, and I often track through left to right in big moments so that I ensure that I don't sing the wrong part. Because as a director, the worst thing is when your soprano 2s learn the wrong part because you're accidentally singing the alto 1 note on a track. So that's a huge thing for me when I'm sight reading, specifically for show choir and a cappella. And also being really honest with myself. You know, some days are better than others. There are days where I'm going to sight read a lot faster than others, and I just have to be okay with that and celebrate the days where it goes really fast and be okay with the days where I'm like, why can't I get this rhythm? Oh my God, I need to like go take a lap and come back. So yeah.
So do you guys typically like take one part and sing it all the way through, or do you take like a section and do all of the parts for these, 16 bars and then move to the next chunk and like work your way down? Like, what's your process for getting through it?
I go one line all the way through.
I typically do one line all the way through, but with some exceptions, I think if there's a big shift in or if it's a song where it's a mashup and we start in one song and we go to the other, sometimes I'll do like all of song A first and get that done and then come back. But for me, and I don't know what the women would say about this, but I have a hard time like jumping from like singing like high G's and then have to sing like low C's for the basses. And also because I'm just so not a bass. Garrett makes fun of me when he writes low things and I try to sing them and then he laughs at me. But I think it gets hard for me if I try to like bounce back and forth. Whereas if I can sit on the tenor notes and then kind of switch gears and be able to do bass, it's easier for me.
I remember reading a cappella arranging by Deke Sharon and Dylan Bell, I think he wrote it with. And he recommended in there when you're recording parts for a cappella or just anything in general to start with the inner voice and then expand out. And that's going to help your accuracy and your tuning and be able to blend into the middle. And I've just never forgotten that. That's been really helpful. So I always start with the alto line, but I'll do it in keys. So Garrett is, he loves key changes. So anyway, I'll do all the alto part for that key and then do the parts above and then move to the next key. And maybe that's a change of song or what have you, but I tend to do it so that I don't have to change tonal centers in my head. And then with the recording process, as far as sight reading in that, rhythm is just a lot harder to edit when you mess it up. And because I do all of my recording during nap time, time's up ticking. So I gotta get it done. So I'll get everything recorded and where I know the rhythms are correct. And then when I'm listening to it back, I use flux pitch to adjust pitches that were not sung in correctly, because that is actually pretty easy. Or if Garrett writes something that I cannot sing, like, you know, all the ledger lines, it's just not my wheelhouse. So I'll sing in the correct rhythm and then I'll pitch shift it up there to sing the notes that I cannot sing.
I am by far the worst sight reader on this Zoom right now. It's not what I grew up doing at all. And I'm actually
Cazz
learning.
is our token, not choir person.
Yeah. I am the token non.
But he's also the only person who actually knows how to record things. So that's the benefit, you know.
Sword. Kate actually will sight read a lot of my parts, and I'll keep the MIDI open. I can sight read like MIDI better than I'll sight read like a staff. And so I actually go in sections, all of my parts, just because they're fresh in my brain. So I'll do, whether it's like 4 bars, 8 bars, 16 bars, and then just go through that way.
So Cazz, why don't you just give us like basic audio engineering for dummies? Like what are the like, let's just assume that you know, this is not for public consumption, it's just for your students in your classroom. What kind of editing tricks and effects do you recommend?
Sure. So are we assuming they record? Do they have a recording setup, or were using like phones and laptops? Or does that matter?
Well, does it? What do you think?
Look, like I've recorded grand pianos with iPhones because they sounded cool. And Kate and I were talking earlier before everyone joined in. I did like over 100 voices that were recorded on phones or laptops. I tend to, for this kind of stuff at least, I'll use some denoising plugins, and I'll take all the clicks and pops out because that's pretty common with kind of low quality gear, which is totally fine. And I think what I like to do is listen to everything at once, because a lot of problems disappear. So if I have 100 voices and I just solo each voice and I'm like, oh, this sounds bad, let me EQ this voice, and I spend 10 minutes, then I go on the next voice. If I just play all of them at once, a lot of those problems sort of solve themselves because everybody gets quieter and balanced. Things to look out for, in this kind of stuff, I have to sing multiple takes sometimes because I'm just not the greatest vocalist or sight reader. So I'll keep a little playlist and I comp them quickly. I know some of you said you're on like Logic. I'm on Pro Tools. Comping's really easy these days. I just solo the track with my headphones and listen through, make sure you don't hear any pops or glitches or weird things. Those are pet peeves of mine. So I'm just really sort of anal retentive about editing things. I like to turn it up loud and use headphones and make sure I don't hear clicks or pops. I don't know. I don't want to go crazy because.
Can you settle something on terminology for us? Like editing, that's going through and like cutting out things that are wrong, right? Like getting rid of the extra clicks and the pops, and if there's a note that's just totally off, you know, like fixing it or cutting it out, like that kind of stuff, right?
I'd call that editing. I'd call tuning editing or pitch shifting editing.
And you do all that stuff first, right? Before you start messing with the track.
Yeah, for the most part.
And so then after that, you have like the reverb and the EQ and that kind of stuff. And is that more mixing or is that still editing?
I call that mixing, yeah. Yeah.
So I know, like, it all depends on what software you're using. But I found that when you're doing the same kind of recording over and over again, you can save a lot of time by building templates. So like I have a template in Logic that's just for show choir stuff. And at least with Logic, I think it's called your channel settings. You can save channel settings. So I I literally have a channel setting called Mike, and I have one called Megan, and I have like Mike's EQ and Mike's compressor and Mike's reverb, and same for Megan. And so when we're recording, I don't have to go through and like do the same mixing and editing stuff each time because those effects just sort of automatically get put on. It'd be different, if this was something that I was putting out to the world as a commercial recording, but since it's just, for use with my students, it's a lot easier to just kind of know, basically, this is where he usually is. So I think if you're recording yourself, obviously, your voice. If you're recording, your students over and over throughout the year, you might get a sense of like, okay, it sounds better when I have these things sort of preset. And you can apply it to all the tracks at once instead of having to. You can also do that through busing with a lot of things, just take all of your tracks and send them to one reverb or one EQ or whatever. But I guess, Mike, what would you say? Do you approach it differently when you're editing a virtual choir where you have hundreds of tracks? Do you approach that differently than if it's just, you and Megan, or even if it's just your choir? Like how does the size of the group change the mixing and editing side of things?
Yeah, well, I think, the point that Cazz was making about how when you have 100 people, that it really does even out. What I've found as I've done more of these virtual choir projects is that it is so much like real choir, where like if you have a real choir and you have 50 people and there's a kid who's like a little tone deaf in there, like it's okay as long as everybody else is doing a good job. Like you don't even have to take them completely out of the mix because it makes it sound more real, so so there's multiple things. Number one is like, what is the goal of the recording? Because I think sometimes, for our company, when we do these virtual choir projects, like we kind of have a philosophy that we always tell clients that we want your group to sound like your group. We don't want them to sound perfect because the part of the magic of it is like feeling like it sounds like them. And I'm not saying that we want them to like have lots of wrong notes or like lots of big noises in the background. But we want it to sound like them. And if they don't sing 100% in tune, then that's okay. Because it's, when I have a video of my freshman women's choir, like I don't want them to sound like the Vienna boys choir. Like I just want them to sound like them. So that's number one, is that I think it kind of depends on the purpose. But I also think that the smaller the group, then the more it is required, kind of what Cazz was talking about, to go in and solo each track and like really listen to the details more. Because if you've only got, like if it's a recording that Megan and I did where we're literally just singing each part and there's only one on a part, then if there's a problem, the problem needs to be fixed because it's the only thing that's there, compared to if you have 10 tenors singing the part, and if one of the tenors is wrong, first of all, you can just drop that tenor out for that section, or maybe they're just a little bit lower in the mix and and you can just leave it, So I think, there's all kinds of considerations, but I think, the big thing is just, I have learned the most about doing this just by doing a lot of listening. And I think if you're a choir director that wants to like get into this, I would just encourage you to start doing it, because I think the more that you do it, if you have a good ear for what a choir is supposed to sound like, then just like keep pushing buttons until it sounds the way you want it to. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of, you can learn a lot that way. I think my one other trick I would say before we move off this is that I have found mixing and editing to be extremely visual, that I feel like you can see problems in the waveform a lot. That's a very helpful thing. Like if you have 8 tracks and you can kind of see that all of them are doing the same thing, and then there's one that has like a big burst, then you can kind of jump to that and realize what's going on there. And I find that it helps me. Sometimes I will even like turn the sound off and just watch it play and be like, what's happening here? And it can actually help me to get out of my ears and just watch the waveforms. Can be helpful too.
So maybe let's go through some of the tricks. Like, let's just start with reverb. So you're adding reverb to a track. Like, what are you listening for? Like, how do you know when it's right? Like, what's the point of adding it? Cazz, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Reverb basically, well, a lot of us are in small rooms like we all talked about earlier. I have a ton of acoustic treatment in my room. You can't really see it, but like stuff from floor to ceiling and above my head. So my room is super dry, which is great for mixing, not ideal for like playing or singing. Well, depends what you want. But so when I add reverb, it's to put me in a space. It's to put me in a bigger studio, or to put me in an auditorium, or to put me in a canyon. Like, it just depends what song you want. In pop music, which some of these like tracks we're doing are kind of more pop songs, um the biggest thing that I've learned over the years is I used to put too much reverb because I thought that that's what a song needed, and then I would go and compare other songs and they sounded so much drier to me. So I lean very much on less is more or shorter reverbs. That said, it just kind of depends whether, like, if we're doing an a cappella choir, like, you want it to feel like you're in a performance venue. So you're gonna have a longer hall type reverb. If you're doing like a pop song, maybe you want a short plate reverb, or like just a short slapback delay instead of reverb altogether. But yeah, maybe that starts. Someone can jump in.
Well, the way I was taught is you kind of, you're right in the fader, and you the first thing you do, you figure out what's too much, right?
Sure.
And then you pull back, and you want to kind of find that sweet spot where you don't notice it anymore.
Yeah.
You don't want the reverb to call attention to itself.
Yep. And you don't want to choose your reverb while listening to your vocals soloed, because you'll never hear it that way. So play the track, play your vocals or your lead vocal, and then start doing exactly what you said, Garrett. You had said earlier also, like, you can make a bus and put your reverbs or effects on the bus. I always do that because I use multiple buses. Sometimes I want a long reverb only for a chorus or for the end of a song. Like, you just want like that big reverb tail at the end of a big like climactic moment, and so I'll just automate that in on a bus. If you throw reverb on individual tracks, which it can work, and certainly that's an easier way to do it, I think you go down the trap of like too much reverb too soon, and you sort of lose sight.
Well, and something that I found too, because I learned that trick over the course of doing virtual choirs this year, of putting the reverb on the bus. And something that I found initially, I was putting reverb on each track individually. And I also found that it like slowed down my computer a lot. Like, if you don't have a computer that's powerful, because then you're running effects potentially, 100 times on 100 separate tracks, compared to just running it on the full out into that bus, which is just one thing. And it also then makes it much easier for you to play, because you can just switch from that reverb to another one and it changes everything, rather than having to try to like highlight all your tracks and then you miss one and then you can't figure out why one person sounds weird and all that.
So I'm curious, Mike, like, when it comes to choir recordings, when you're doing like EQ and compressors, are you doing it on each track, or are you just doing sort of a group one to polish it a little bit? Because the way I was taught to EQ is, you go through each instrument and you go through each part, and you kind of figure out what its space is, and you create space for everything. But when you've got 100 singers, like, that doesn't seem super practical.
Yeah, I would say generally when I'm doing the virtual choir stuff, I have kind of a standard compressor EQ that I have figured out over the course of this year, and I might change it after, I don't know, as I do more of them, but one that I feel like generally sounds pretty good with the average recording that is sent to me, done on an iPhone, that generally sounds pretty decent, and that's always where I start. And to be honest, the only time that I really get in and mess with that stuff is if I have like soloists and there's somebody who obviously recorded in a very different kind of space or has a different timbre or tone to their voice that, you know, needs a little bit of massaging, then I'll get into that. But I don't usually, especially on a larger choir project, I'm not usually spending a lot of time individually EQing people.
Well, I mean, EQ, I guess EQ for dummies, right? It's more about highlighting a specific range, like a frequency range of the voice. So if they don't need it, they don't need it, right? I mean, the first rule is if it sounds good, it sounds good. At least that's what I think, you know. Compression's more about just getting rid of the outliers, right? Or would you explain it in a different way?
I would not want to explain it. I'm not. I think Cazz should explain it.
I think that's a fair answer. I gravitate toward EQ to correct things instead of boosting quite as much. So like for at least this context. So if I'm getting iPhone recordings, sometimes you'll hear like just this high like noise super high up in the frequency spectrum, and it's maybe like an air conditioner or it's a kid's laptop fan. So I use EQ to pull that out. I use EQ to pull out everything below like 80, 90, 100 hertz for this kind of stuff, because it's just low noise of trucks going by or like heaters in the background or and that stuff really does add up, and suddenly the next thing you know, you can't hear it, but you're like, why is my master bus like redding out? Because you just have all this low noise happening. So I pull EQs out right away, and I just cut out frequencies that are annoying or just filling up space. And then yeah, I mean, I think you answered compression in a good way. Like it's a way of taming louder dynamics and a way of boosting quieter parts so that everything sort of goes from here to here.
We have a question about panning, which is a really good one. How do you pan choral recordings, and especially in virtual choir when you have a gazillion people? What's your approach for that?
So what I
comment about from the director side, actually, this is a question that Cazz actually asked me when I sent him my first recording project this year. He said, well, what do you want for a pan? And I was like, why are you asking me that? Like, there's no pan. They're in their house. They're not in a standing formation. And it made me realize this is really important for directors to think about. So just a note to all of us on the call who are directors: how would you have your group stand if they were in front of you? Have that vision and talk to your engineers about that, because they can make that happen. And with that, I'll hand it back to Mike. Sorry, I cut you off.
Yeah, no, you're good. That was great. And I think, you know, I will say I've done about 150 of these, and I've not had a director give me instruction on how they want it panned. So typically what I will do is, so I always group people by voice part when I'm doing these virtual recordings. So I send all of the sopranos to a bus that we've been talking about, you know, and so they're on their own fader and they have their own position. And so those groupings, I usually put the sopranos and basses down the middle, and then I have the tenors and altos slightly to opposite sides, so that we're getting the melody and the foundation right down the middle, and then the middle voices a little bit to the outside, but nobody all the way to the outside, because I don't like the idea of only hearing the altos in one ear if I were listening to it on headphones, and all that kind of thing. But then within each voice part, what I will do, depending on the size of the group, is just try to, it's a little more complicated than this, but basically just like randomly try to disperse them within that. So like the overall sopranos are down the middle, but within that we've got like people all over the place, which I think does help to spread it out a little bit. But again, this is one of those things that like I'm just kind of playing, and I think that gives it a little bit more of a real choir sound. And I try to be cognizant of keeping like the stronger voices more toward the middle of each voice part. The way that you would do it in a choir, where you have your strongest voice kind of more in the middle of the section. So I'm just doing it based on what I think I would do if I were putting kids on stage. But I am interested to listen to Cazz's perspective on this, because he knows more about it on the recording end.
I do the exact same thing that you do.
Oh, I'm so proud.
As far as like busing each group together and then panning the entire group slightly, and then within each subgroup, like panning the members. The only thing that I sometimes will do is I'll add a bus for extra width, like a doubler, and I'll just sort of like blend it in a little bit, and that makes things just even wider. But I mean, if you think about it and you go to an auditorium and hear a choir, you're not really going to hear it that way. So that's just like a studio trick, which is I probably shouldn't even do it. I just like it, but yeah. And reverb, when you bus everything to the same reverb, that's going to help blend everybody the way you would hear it as if you were in the audience. So,
Megan, do you have any recommendations on things to put in the track or things to put with the track to kind of help singers, you know, students or not, just to help them, I guess, have a good experience recording? I know I've sent you some very terrible tracks, you know, and so just what are some tips for making it easier to sing along and to sing with a track?
Oh, okay. So sorry, now I understand your question. So the tracks that are the best experience for me, you've got I'm using Logic, and so in the global track, you've got tempo changes mapped out in the click, and that's massively helpful. And if you
the click when you record.
When I record. Wait, what?
You have the click going along with the track?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Sometimes I'll have the click louder than the track, because that is just so important. I know you export the MIDI of your finale into the Logic project, and sometimes Logic gets it right and sometimes it doesn't, but most of the time it does. But most of the time you put in time signature changes. Every once in a while I'll have to go in there and add the 2/4 bar so that the measures all line up, because if I'm just going in there to, you know, we'll do the first part of the song and then there's this dance break, you know, I'm not just gonna stand there and wait for it to be over. I'm gonna jump ahead to the next measure where I'm singing. And so if there's a time signature that's not included, that gets annoying. So with your Logic, whatever you're using, having those measures match your sheet music, it sounds really basic, but it saves a ton of time. It helps you go in and punch just that one random hey, yeah, before the big dance break. And so that is really, really helpful. And then the track itself, I usually listen at least to the beginning of it to kind of hear, did you arrange it to make it sound like the track that it was based on, right? Or did you reinvent it? Like, are we in a new style now? You sent me a mashup recently that I think it was wound up being something very Latin, but neither of the songs that were originally in it were Latin. So I was like, okay, well, I want to pull the R&B and the country and make it Latin somehow. How do I do this? So I try to listen to your track too, to just get a sense of the goal genre. And then if you're wanting it swung, we've talked about that a couple of times too, that finale sometimes exports the swing in your rhythm and sometimes it doesn't. So just as a recorder, the more you have in your score will help me record it the way you want it to be sung. And it just something as simple as dynamics in there, you know, I know you're going to mix it, but if I can deliver in a way as a singer of how I do that, that helps a lot too. So
Well, you sing it differently at you know, piano versus a forte. So even
right.
though, yeah, you're right. Even though you can set it in the mix, it still just has a different sound to it.
Yeah. So I can play with a little bit of things that you can't write down in the track or in the score. You know, sometimes you do give me funny things to use, but if you have that a cappella, you know, ballad that comes out of nowhere, you have that like whispery sound, you know, you're not going to put that in the score, but I can give that to you as an example. Especially with the commercial stuff. Sometimes you just put slashes in and say, please make something up in the solo line. Great. But I try to think about who's going to be singing that at the end of the day too, to give you something that you can, you know, write down if you feel like it or not. So
Well, that is a funny thing you bring up, because I there have been a couple of times when I've gone and worked with a group that's been using these recordings, and the soloist will get up and like do their best Megan impression, and they will sing like note for note, you know, like the runs and stuff that you put on the track. So I think, you know, from the educational side of things, like you also have to be aware, like if you're making a track for your students, they are going to copy everything you do.
mm-hmm.
And it's going to be hard to break some of those habits if they're wrong. So things like cutoffs and like how you want the diction to be, you know, hard T, soft T, all that kind of stuff. If you don't do that correctly in the tracks, like you're just going to be fighting your children with it all year.
Right. And you actually had, when we were first starting to do this, to blend Mike and I together, I had to up my legit game. And because I wasn't being faithful with clean consonants. I was being too commercial and I didn't have that choral thing in mind. So that was really helpful to start thinking about it as a more choral thing instead of the commercial a cappella that I was used to recording. So yeah.
And I think the point that you make, Megan, is really important about like having stuff in the score, because I know like for my own groups, Garrett and I are always writing them at the very last minute, and it's literally like we finish writing it at like 1 a.m, and then we send it to Megan. We're like, can you record this tomorrow, please? And so we never have like any dynamic markings anywhere.
Right.
And but it's true that sometimes that really bites us, because then there's something that like we record, and even me, sometimes I sing it and I like haven't thought about it enough yet. Right. And then we're working with that track, and we get to a point in the rehearsal process where I'm like, I can't use the track anymore because the track is wrong. You know, like even we're singing the right notes and rhythms, but stylistically the track is wrong because we didn't mark the score right. And so, you know, either one of us did stuff that just is not the way it should be. And so that's is important to, you know, remember that if you have something specific, or you want that moment where you're going to get super quiet, or you're going to have a big dramatic crescendo, that if it's not on the track, then that's going to really get in the way of your kids learning it the way that you want it to. Not that I think we should learn it by listening to the track, but they do. If you're going to keep dancing to it over and over again, no matter what, they are going to sing it like that. So.
Well, yes. I also think if you're giving your kids something to record, like for your holiday concert or your virtual choir, whatever, like it doesn't have to be a custom chart. It could be something you bought from J.W. Pepper, but you can mark in your cutoffs and you can mark in your extra dynamics that you would have added if you were in rehearsal in front of them. And you can prepare the score as much as you can so that when they record it, they're more likely to do it the way you want. And, you know, it just answers, like I think of it as you want to answer those dumb, annoying questions that people always ask in rehearsal. You want to answer as many of those as you can through your music. You know, so if you're going to change a cutoff, or if you're going to, you know, I know like in show choir, Mike, you always add lots of shadow consonants and you have them write in like duh in their music, just so they sing it duh, you know, things like that. You know, you can prepare your scores before you give it to your choir and have those rehearsal notes in there, and that can help them even if it's nothing on the track. Why don't we shift gears a little bit? Kate, why don't you, I guess from the from the classroom side of things, what have you been noticing about using these with your kids on a day-to-day basis? You know, however it is that you're running rehearsal, you're running things on Zoom, like what have you experienced?
Mm. Well, I can start by just giving a little bit of context for how my school is working this year. So I'm teaching fully remotely. So I have no students in front of me. No students are in the room together. They're all on mute on a Google Meet session, and they have never heard each other sing until they get the recording back. And so I don't have the in the moment formative assessment that I typically do because I don't hear them sing during class. And I'm doing a lot of listening after the fact. I might say, okay, tonight you're going to do a recording for me of measures 17 to 34. And then I'm going to take the time to go listen to all of them and then plan what I'm going to do the next day from there. So we are working a lot with tracks. And I've finessed it a bit across the first semester, and I've found exactly what we all just said. Students are going to parrot back to us exactly what they hear, especially our more beginner students who don't read as much. And who honestly for the past year and a half haven't been reading music. You know, all the sight reading factory practice in the world is not going to prepare them to get an actual choral score in front of them on the first day of high school. So they're doing a lot by ear. And I've found that the most success has come from trusting that they're going to listen to what they have in the recording and emulate it. So yes, cutoffs, approach to the breath, the timing of the breath, the shape of the breath for a gorgeous onset of tone in any style, pop, rock, I mean, legit choral, all of it, and allowing them the time to actually practice with their own setup at home. So one of our assignments was take a picture or have someone take a picture of you in your studio. What does it look like? And to say, okay, so I'm going to record in my bedroom and I'm going to put my laptop on my dresser and I'm going to have the PDF open in preview and I'm going to have my iPhone in my hand and my headphones are plugged into my computer. Like we took days of class to go through this process with the kids, and we've become much better for it because they all have a somewhat similar at-home recording setup. And it's been much easier, I would hope, and Cazz jump in, the recordings I think have become more standardized because the kids' setup has become more standardized and now they're a little bit more used to it. So yeah, give them what you want to hear back and give them a chance to practice, try it out, and really take the time to go through the setup like they need it so that they know exactly what you want from them, I guess.
Have you noticed any, I guess, patterns in terms of like, you know, is it better to do AirPods if you have them, or is it better to do the laptop, or is the iPhone fine? I mean, for people who don't have legit studio gear, what have you been finding that's the best quality?
The best quality that I've come across with my students, and granted, I will say we're a one-to-one district, so some of my students have MacBooks and some have Chromebooks, but they all have a device from school. And I would say most of them have a secondary device like an iPhone, an Android, or a parent maybe has an iPad, but not all, but I would say I'm lucky enough that most of my students have that. They record into their voice memo app and they're playing the track usually from Google Classroom. I post everything on Classroom. So they have their sheet music PDF and all of the tracks. I give them a part track for each and a full track and then an accompaniment track with clicks and without, so they can choose what they want. And they usually wear wired headphones. I've discouraged them from using AirPods because there's been some issues with delay. So I tell them a wired set of headphones. I had one, just like the white, you know, Apple headphones are also good, but some of them have nicer headphones. Yeah, and they sing and they record into their voice memos, and then they post the voice memo M4A or MP3 back to me, and that's what I send to Cazz.
So we just got a comment about Band Lab, which is a perfect segue to my next question. But I was just going to ask, what do you guys recommend for file management? because recording yourself or recording your students, either way, you're going to end up with a lot of files. How do you put them in the right place? How do you organize it so you find them? How do you collaborate with other people? How do you stop your computer from frying? Cazz, why don't you start?
Sure. I feel like industry standard for good reason is to have a separate hard drive for the sessions themselves that is not on your operating drive. So like I have Pro Tools and all my software on my main hard drive on my computer. I have an iMac. So I keep my sessions on a separate hard drive. And it just, I think this is the case with Logic and Ableton and Pro Tools. It just, they play better when the system doesn't have to like read and rewrite files on the same hard drive as the software itself. I don't know why, but that's the case. So I keep separate hard drives for my sessions, and I just keep, folders. Like in Kate's instance, I have a Natick High School folder, and within that, I have each song or session that we're working on. And then just because I have to, I back everything up to Dropbox, and if I have enough time, I keep a separate hard drive that I back up. But they add up fast, like you said. I mean, when I'm working, their WAV files or AIFFs. They're no longer MP3s. So every little edit I do, or like I'm adding another WAV file, it's just they get to be huge. So you need extra hard drives. I know it can be expensive, but it's worth it.
The thing that we do with Riverbend, we work a lot in Google Drive, and a thing that I think would be helpful for teachers that are trying to do this themselves is like, I have through school, I have an unlimited Google Drive account. And so what I'll do a lot of is really use Google Forms. And I don't know if everybody knows this, but in a Google form, you can have a question that is a file upload. And so this is what we do for most of our clients through Riverbend too. And I always do it with my kids, because what's nice is that you can collect other information in the Google form as well. So we always do like first name, last name, and then voice part. And then sometimes you need other information, like if you're making a video and you want to have all your seniors featured, like you can have a question like, are you a senior? And they can click yes. And then if you have people you're collaborating on with the project, everybody can know, because then you get a spreadsheet and you can sort by senior. And so you can keep all those files in one place. And the kind of lesson that we've learned over time is that if there are different videos that you need to keep straight when you're doing one of these projects for various reasons, like for instance, if there's a choreography video and a singing video or things like that, that it's good to have separate Google Forms, because then it will automatically put them in separate folders. And then you don't have to do any of that sorting to keep things straight as you're going into the editing and creating process. So the Google form has been very central to what we've done to keep everything straight, because it kind of lets you organize it however you need to for the specific project that you're working on. That can be all kinds of different things. And it's nice because kids can upload directly from their phone that they took the video on, which then you don't get into any of the problems of like when they email it, sometimes email will degrade the file quality and then it's not as nice as it once was. So that's a nice thing, that it can be a direct upload and then it goes, straight to whoever's going to work on it.
I would just add one other thing, which is there's no right way to do it, but you should have a uniform way of naming tracks. Because especially if you're recording from phones, it's going to be like new recording 55. And you're like, I don't know who that is. That could be any kid in any song. So for us, what's worked is either the full title of the song or the first word underscore voice part underscore last name. And that has helped just immensely in the track organization process. But do what works for you and your school, your group. But have a uniform way. And for me, when I post the assignment for students to upload, I have to write it every time so that they remember and the tracks are correct. Because then I'm the one who has to go in and rename everyone's tracks, which is not always the most fun when it's clearly written in the instructions.
Well, and especially when you're collaborating with other people, you can end up with a lot of duplicate files, you know, like when I'm even for me, when I'm making the show choir tracks, you know, I'm only working with 2 or 3 people, but you know, I'll have the initial session that I build and I send off to somebody, but then there ends up, you know, on I use Dropbox with these guys right here. But you know, there'll be like the version with no vocals. Then there'll be a session with just Megan's voice on it. And then there'll be a session with Megan and Mike, but it's not mixed. And then there's the session that I mixed, you know, and then we had to go change something. We had to go put a cut in. So then there's like a 5th version with a cut, you know, so all of a sudden there's 5 or 6 different sessions that all have the same name. So it really does pay off to have some kind of a naming system. A trick we just discovered recently is that at least on Mac, when you have a long file name, it cuts out the middle part. So it shows you the beginning of the song and it shows you the end of the song. So I've started naming, like instead of naming it, you know, The World Is Ours, blah, 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 blah track, you know, I'll put the more important info at the end. So I'll just say like, The World Is Ours, track soprano. That way, when it's shortened on the screen, you can just see the name of the song and then the voice part at the end. So that's something to think about too. Besides Google Classroom and Google Docs and Dropbox, are there any other systems that you guys have used either to collaborate with somebody else professionally or with your students? Are there other systems out there that are good for this kind of thing?
I know I have colleagues who are using, especially instrumental colleagues who are using other programs with students, but I haven't tried them. Honestly, those have worked great on the vocal side.
If someone needs to stream live audio better than Zoom quality, I use a plugin called Listen To by Audio Movers. So I'll have a Zoom window open with whoever I'm working with, and then I put this plugin on my master bus called Listen To, and it creates a real-time stream that I can upload the link to them. And so when I'm doing like a mixing session with somebody, they don't have to be in my studio anymore. They can follow the link, put on their headphones or their monitors, and then watch my screen, because I'll screen share via Zoom, and they'll get pretty good quality real-time streaming. So if that matters to anybody, that's a good plugin out there these days.
So I did want to ask one thing, especially for Megan and Kate, but have you noticed differences in recording that are more dependent on the style? That was a bad way of asking the question, but I just mean like if you're recording something that's choral versus something that's a cappella or something that's musical theater or something that's more pop, like what are some basic differences that happen depending on the style that you're working in?
I mean, as far as the recording process, there's not a ton of difference. It's more in the performance of it. Going back to what you guys were all saying about like, they're gonna sing it how you record it. I would say that if I'm doing something for an a cappella or smaller group, I'm going to be closer proximity wise to get some of that just the subtleties. And you know, in a cappella, you're gonna have someone doing a whisper track, or you're gonna have somebody making weird sound effects as well as singing, you know. But then a choral thing, I tend to step back just a little bit so that I can make it feel like I am one of the choir. That doesn't make much sense probably, but the musical theater sound, you know, it's not so subtle, it's not so intimate. So I'm going to record it that way. Just how close I am to the microphone and the diction I'm using, and even just the amount of vibrato I'm using. But those are all kind of performance-y things that I just try to think about.
Performance and technical, you pretty much record everything the same way?
Pretty much, yeah. I think it's the proximity changes just a little. Yeah. That's for me. Kate, go ahead.
I agree. I think it's mostly probably in my brain, in my awareness of myself as a performer when I'm singing, especially when I'm recording the soprano tracks. And a lot of Garrett's soprano lines are epic and amazing and high and full. And so when I'm singing those, I have to put myself on a huge stage and take up a lot of space in my like physical.
Like 8 feet away from the mic. Yeah.
Honestly, and that's actually when I hold the mic more, is when I'm recording the soprano lines, because I kind of Christina Aguilera it a little bit, but it's because I'm trying to create a more epic sound. And I agree with Megan, when I'm doing a cappella stuff or smaller moments in a piece or for a smaller ensemble, I'm a little closer to the mic. I'm a little bit more aware of my mouth and like exactly what I'm doing. I feel like I want everything that I'm doing to be heard. It's a little bit more intentional. So yeah, that's my same proximity, but also as a singer, and this is good for students to know too, like you can't just be a 17-year-old in their bedroom singing. You have to be on stage with your choir performing. You know, if it helps, like wear something that makes you feel awesome, or be in front of a mirror, or don't, or whatever it is. You're not going to get a authentic performance as an artist if you're not fully there. And we all know that, but it's good to remind ourselves and our students of that too.
I have a lot of gestures, especially when Garrett asks me to rap. I think I did Macklemore recently. So yes.
You did.
It was really fun.
I was going to do that rap and then you did it. And I was like, I'm leaving it. It's
Yes.
good.
But yeah, you got to commit, and you got to put on your best acting suit sometimes, for sure, because it comes through in the microphone. It's just like if any of you guys have worked in customer service, on the phone, people can hear whether you're smiling, and that is so true when you're singing something. You know, you can be very accurate, but it's not going to sound good unless you are really performing it, even if you are in your closet. So you kind of have to do a little extra too, because the microphone can't see your face. So perform and then like give it a little extra juice, and then it's gonna sound real good. So
Well, and I think too, at least for educational purposes, right? The performance is going to matter a lot more than the production of it, right? I mean, it may not be a great microphone, it may not be mixed very well, but if you're singing it the way you want your students to sing, like it's going to accomplish your purposes. And so, I mean, I think you might feel uncomfortable, you know, in your laundry room, you know, gesturing and all of that, but I think it pays off. Real quick here, Mike, let's go down the virtual choir rabbit hole a little bit. If it's possible that somebody hasn't already had to make one, what would you say is just sort of like, what are the resources out there? What are the basic things you need to know to create one? Are there alternatives to virtual choirs that maybe are better if you're not set up to do a full-on video? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of things out there. You know, I think the easiest path is if you have the money to pay somebody to do it for you. That's an easy way to do it. But, you know, everybody doesn't have that. And honestly, like we started our company because I was doing this for my own kids with one of my alums who knew how to do it. And then we said, we can probably do this for other people. So, I mean, what we use to create them is Logic, that we've been talking about a lot for the audio, and then Final Cut Pro for the video. I am aware of a program called DaVinci Resolve that a lot of people are using right now that I believe is free and has a pretty functional free version. And I think they even have some kind of templates for virtual choir that can really get you down the road. So that's called DaVinci Resolve. And I think that, you know, the big thing that I think sometimes people don't understand about the process for doing the virtual choirs that can make it feel slightly less daunting is that it really is two projects. There's a video project and an audio project, and they are separate. that even when we only get video files from a client, like they've only recorded videos and they're singing on the video, the first step of the process is to strip the audio off of those videos and then work with it separately. So even if the same person is completing the whole project, you're working on two different things. And so I think a lot of us as choir directors might feel more comfortable going in, even just in GarageBand. Like GarageBand can get the job done for you. You don't have to have Logic. You don't have to have Pro Tools. Like you can do it in GarageBand, and on a Mac, like you can pull the audio off of a video. It's just like you just right click on it or control click, and you choose encode video file and then say audio only, and you can pull it off and put it in GarageBand and mix it. And you can do, I've done some things like Kate was saying just in class, like you can just do a class recording. We even did one where we did it on Zoom, and I said, okay, everybody pull out your phone right now during class. And we just did like a really rough one. And I said, okay, I'm going to clap right now so we can have something to line it up. And we went, here we go, and clap. And then I could hear that clap. And so on Zoom, we were not together, but then I was able to take their files and line them all up, and mostly it worked. So I think if you can separate that out and just focus on the audio, a lot of us who are choir directors, I think, feel like that might be something that's more achievable because it feels like something we know how to do, to just like balance voices and listen to each other. And then if you can find someone to help you with the video, or if you have time and you're willing to jump in, I think that it is learnable to do a very basic virtual choir where you're just laying out all the videos on the screen. And I would encourage people to realize that what people really want is just to see their kids singing, and to see your choir singing. That's what they want. And that's what's nice about these things. I think there are some people that are railing against them, being like, we shouldn't be relying on this because it's not choir. And I agree, like it sucks. I have a company that does it and I hate it. But I think the thing that is good is that you can see the kids together, you can hear them together, and we like remember that we exist, and we remember that what we do is a thing and is real. And that's a good thing. And so if you can get them on the screen, I mean, I've seen some that I think are like pretty bad, but like they're so endearing because like the videos aren't the same size, and like people clearly were just like trying to make something happen. But I love it. Like, I don't know, like it's beautiful when you just put your kids up there and just make it work. So I think I would encourage people to just like go for it, because I think it is achievable, and to remember that it doesn't have to be perfect. I think people get really sucked down the rabbit hole of trying to make it sound perfect, and it doesn't need to sound perfect. Like just put your kids up there and have them, like, don't make it embarrassing, but just make it nice, That would be like my overarching advice. And I don't know if there are more specific questions I can answer about the process, but.
Well, why don't we open it up real quick here, if anyone watching has a question. You can unmute and jump in, or if you want to put it on the chat, however works for you. Tips on syncing audio and video quickly.
I can tell you our system right now. I will perform it for you. So on every track that we do, like in front of the guide track that Garrett sends me after he mixes, like me and Megan singing or whoever, then I add to the front of it this exact thing. I say, here comes the clap. 1, 2, ready, here we go, and clap. Here comes the song, and then the track starts. And then I tell them all that they need to clap. And so my first step and actually when our company does it, it's not even my step. We have our video person do it because we realized early on that we were both doing this and it saves time. So the first step is we do the videos. And so it says not especially quickly, but we do them one at a time, and we align every video to the guide track. That's our process. And so it probably takes about 1 minute per video is what we have kind of boiled it down to. So You know, if you have a 50-person choir, then it's going to take you about an hour. But so we align them using Final Cut to the guide track. And then once that's been done, we'll cut off whatever comes before that clap. And then we extract the audio from the video at that point and then send that audio. So that way we're only aligning it once. And so then when I get the audio from our video editor, it's already aligned and I drop it into Logic and everything starts at the beginning and it's ready to go. And so that is, that's kind of that's the first step. And it does take a long time. I mean, we're currently we're doing an entirely virtual choired show choir set that we're working on right now. And we've already worked it out. And to do it for my 2 competitive groups, we're going to have to align 850 videos in order to get it done. So, you know, that's going to take a long time. But we're going to spread it out and we're going to do it. So yeah, so that's how, you know, it does take a long time, but that's the process. I don't know, Cazz, and the stuff you've worked on, I don't know if people have different systems.
No, I mean, I don't have to deal with video, but I've had Kate, in this case, do a very similar thing. From the first time we started, there was no like clap or count in. And since then, we've implemented a very similar thing. Unfortunately, like some of the students, no matter what, just can't seem to clap or count in along with her guide track. And so there's inevitably like some tracks that you have to just sort of visually line up. But if you have that clap or that whatever, that everyone counts in together, whatever, it helps so much.
Yeah, and I see the comment about you know, having them play the reference audio really loud, and that totally works if it's not a singing video, if they're not recording the singing on the video. But when you want only their voice, that's why we use the clap. And doing that like synchronized definitely does work. But the other thing I was gonna say is that I know that the like Eric Whitaker, when he did the virtual choir, the way that he did it was he had like a beep on the reference track, and the instruction was to leave your headphones unplugged, and then after the beep, plug in your headphones so that you would hear the beep and then you would plug in so you don't hear the rest of it. And that's how they did like the original virtual choirs before it was COVID virtual choir. But the problem with that, you know, that was a while ago. And the problem with that now is that so many of the kids and people have the Bluetooth headphones that then you can't do that, like unplug, plug back in. And while it's better to have wired headphones, most people don't these days. And the Bluetooth works fine for their own individual recording. It's different than what we're doing in Logic with the delay. So that's why we don't do that, like put something on the track to listen to.
So Mike, have you had any groups that have, I guess, tried to do it more traditionally, where you record audio but you're not recording the video, and then you like record video along to the track? You know, like you're sort of Milli Vanilling it and just dancing along to something you've already recorded. Are people doing that, or is that creating extra work?
Yeah, people do that, and it's really not extra work because, like I said, like our first step is to separate it anyway. So if they want to send audio and then do video separate, some people really insist on that because they don't want the headphones in the shot, you know, and that's how you can avoid that. But I personally prefer it with the headphones on because I feel like the final product seems more real when they're singing in the take that was filmed, you know? Yeah. And if you're trying to do it then you would need like 3 devices in order to film and record and listen. That would be too much. So we typically, our advice to people is to just do it in one shot because we think it looks the most real that way. But we absolutely, you know, but then the thing we were talking about, like that Megan was talking about it with the style needing to match the performance also, that's the other problem that you get when people do it separately. Like I actually just had this weekend, my kids had to film one of their things where we're doing this like punk rock song, and the video concept is that they're going crazy on Zoom. So we're going to make it look like a Zoom video, you know, and then they're going to it's that how much longer that you just sang, Megan, a couple last week or whatever. And so what the instruction for their like performance video is that they're supposed to like destroy their room at the end of it. You know, that we told them to like put things on your wall that you can tear down and whatever, and they're jumping up and down and screaming. But we told them like, but that's gonna be weird if on the one that so on that one, obviously they're not gonna record the audio while they're like jumping on their bed. So we're doing a separate audio track for that. But we told them like, you have to perform when you're doing the audio track, because if we get this recording back from you that's like, how much longer will I try before and you're like jumping around your room like going crazy, that's gonna be weird. So that's the other thing, is that like I think everything works better if you do it all at once.
Any other questions? Why don't we end with some parting words of wisdom? All of you were talented musicians first, who pretty much knew nothing about recording and then had to start recording. So I don't think people realize, or at least they didn't until the pandemic, but I don't think people realize how much different it is to sing into a microphone versus just singing. It's a totally different world. I mean, you hear yourself differently. And so what, I guess, and you can throw in anything else you want to add, but what would your advice be to somebody who is just now recording themselves for the first time and struggling with that and trying to get used to that whole world? Why don't we start with you, Cazz?
Sure. Well, I'm going to contradict something Megan said earlier, and I know you won't be upset. She was talking about recording dry and clean, like making sure that you can hear yourself exactly. I come from the song world, like the pop song world, and I want my singer, or myself, if that's the case, to feel as good and like present as they can. And so I dial up the reverb if that's what he or she wants, and I dim the lights and I light the candles, and anything I can do to like calm and set the tone. If someone's better at night, or if I'm better at night, I know I can't sing in the morning, whether I warm up or not. Like I have a window, so I do it then. That is super helpful. And then listening to other tracks, songs that are good references, whether it's choral or pop music or whatever, because you can overdo things or underdo things. Like listen to music and say, what does that voice sound like? Like, oh, I don't hear any reverb. Or, oh my gosh, like, wow, it sounds so much brighter than my vocal does, or so much darker than, like, you can make decisions if you're sitting in your room with headphones or on speakers for 6 hours listening to your own voice. But if you step back for a second, listen to something else, or go for a 5-minute walk, like things will get some clarity. So listen to other tracks that are good references for whatever you're working on. And I don't know, just get the mood, the vibe right.
Thanks. Megan?
Sure. And absolutely 100% agree with that. My students hated it when I took all the reverb out of their in-ear monitors. So sorry, students. But when you're trying to make something really accurate, but yes, put the soul into it by giving yourself the environment that you need to make yourself feel comfortable. Get used to hearing your own voice, because it's super weird. We still have voicemail. Nobody likes hearing their own voicemail. Like, it's just true. So listen to yourself, and if that means standing in the corner of a hard room and talking and singing, so that you just are used to the sound of your own actual voice, know that the whole like finger in your ear thing, you don't sound like that. So that's why it sounds weird when you play it back, because what you hear inside your head is actually different than what everybody else hears. So just get used to hearing yourself, and remember that your voice is not who you are. Voices are super personal, and it can be really hard to listen back and be truly objective about it, because your voice and your soul feel really connected. It's not like a clarinet where there's your instrument and it's over there. Remember that your voice is still just an instrument, and it's a gift that you get to work hard on and improving. And so when you're listening back to a recording of yourself and you're like, I don't like my voice, we all go through that. And the reality is it's an instrument, and you can try it again. And you can do that research that Cazz is talking about too, and learn, why do you like the singers you listen to? What about their performances can you emulate when you're recording? It's really fun to impersonate other people and see what kind of sounds you can record and what different things your voice can do. So see it as an opportunity to be creative with the instrument that is not who you are.
Mike?
Yeah, I think I would say, I said earlier, I think just really do a lot of listening and just keep playing until things sound good. I think my like nuts and bolts advice for recording myself is that I've learned a lot from listening to Megan, I feel like, over the years, because I think she has more experience than me at doing the like commercial music, and like she said that she needed to like do more legit to like be with me, but I think I've learned to like use less vibrato than I think I normally do, and that's something I have learned like listening to her too, but it makes it cleaner and easier to work with. So I think less vibrato is good, and just a lot of listening and doing stuff to make it sound better. And then if I were to say one thing, if you're trying to do virtual choirs with your kids, the thing that I say to all of our clients is that I think it's really important to remember that the point of it is to try to do something that reminds us that we love what we're doing. And so if it starts to get frustrating and painful, then you should just stop and just like do something different, and don't feel like that has to happen, or just turn in something where you look really joyful while you're singing and it's all kinds of wrong in the audio, and then make the person who's editing the audio deal with that, because there's all kinds of tricks for that. So the point of all of this stuff right now is to try to connect us back to the real world, that we hopefully can get back to at some point here soon. And so just remember, what it's all about, and stay focused on that.
All right, Kate, we'll give you the final word.
Wow, thank you. I would just add on to what's been said about exploring and listening, especially to yourself. I think once you've done some of that work, and I would speak directly to young students here too, once you've really taken the time to like be with yourself as a singer, then be bold. Take the opportunity at home that you have to make the noises that you might not make in the choir room. Like go a little bit brighter than you normally would, go a little darker than you normally would, because the beauty of this is students get to self-select what they submit, and they don't always get to do that in our choral rehearsals live. So let's lean into that a little bit and encourage them to make some big choices at home, and then decide what they're comfortable sharing out with us and with our team, right? And then the last thing that I think is especially important this year is many of us as choral directors act as vocal coaches and voice teachers for our students, and we are not getting the in-person time that we usually do with them. At least a lot of us, I'm not, at least. And so I have to really intentionally encourage my students to be mindful of their vocal health this year. They're not sleeping enough. Nobody's hydrated enough. We're not physically active in the same way we used to be. We're sitting in front of screens. Our alignment is awful. Our breathing is shallow. We're out of shape vocally, and we're out of shape as humans. So there's a little bit of extra work that needs to go into just maintaining good vocal quality. And I'd say for young students, the biggest three things are sleep, hydration, and just alignment and breathing. We've got to be stretching. We've got to be doing a little bit of vocalizing every day, and at different points of the day. And I found that that's paid off with my students a bit this year. I think we all just need a little reminder of that sometimes. So be bold, be kind, be good to yourself, and we're all going to get through it. We're getting through it. Look at this. This was amazing. Thank you, Garrett, for putting this together.
No, thank you guys. It was really fun to get all of you in the same place and sort of pick your brains. And I learned stuff too, even though I don't have any high school kids that I have to coach singing right now. Thank goodness. And thank you everyone watching. The video of this will go on YouTube sometime tomorrow. And in the description or in the comments, I will put everybody's websites so you can go hire them to record for you or to mix for you or to make videos for you. Feel free, steal all these people, hire them. Or if you just have questions, about something that you think of later or something that comes up, I think anyone here would be willing to reach out and provide whatever help that they can, because that's what the music industry is all about. That's what education is all about, and everything that we're doing right now. So I guess if there's no other questions, well, thank you guys and see you next time.